I know that this particular thing's been going on for quite some time, so what can we expect?
Well, I think short term, as I say, if, we could mount a single sign on a post, once we get it. It was just a delay of getting the locate so we can put the post in.
But I think what I'm hearing from them is they'd rather not spend the money on a temporary.
Well, I would really like to get with these other organizations first and see if we can come to a consensus of that.
Okay.
And then if we can't, we'll certainly go to our single post sign.
I guess my thing is like I said, it's really not going to make a difference if we did the single post now and did that later, because you're going to use the same sign. So why not go ahead and do it?
Yeah.
Because the only thing we got to be careful of when we decide on the fence or the sign itself, what size is everybody else going to have? That's got to be an agreeable thing with all the other service organizations, because you can't have 130, 124, 118.
Mm-hmm.
They're all going to have to be compatible. And so, maybe if we get with them and talk to all the other and see what they agree to, and then we'll buy our signs based on that and get with you and put up the individual things. Are you still good with the 2 and 2, or?
We'll do it. Absolutely.
I think that'd be great.
Okay, good. Great. Terrific.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to see you.
That's it.
Great. Thanks, Jody.
Thanks, Jody.
The next item on your work session agenda tonight is continuing the conversation that we had at the last meeting regarding a potential cooperative agreement with the City of Edgerton regarding wastewater and the possibility of working together to serve a particular area. Jim, I don't know if you want to introduce the folks that are going to make the presentation this evening, and I think they have about, 10 or 15 minutes worth of presentation, and then they would be happy to answer questions that you may have. So, Jim, if you'd make the introductions, please.
I can try and make the introduction at least. Jeff and Isaac are here from the Burns & McDonnell, and they are the company that is doing the design build for Edgerton. And we hopefully are going to have something to present to you here that will be attractive. It certainly should save us some considerable money to be able to cooperate with Edgerton. So with that, I'll turn it over to Isaac and Jeff.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thanks for allowing us a few minutes of your time. I know you've got a lot of things on your agenda. We're handing out a couple of handouts that we'll talk through. Again, what we have to present to you is going to only take about 10 to 15 minutes. We're here as long as you want us to be here to answer any questions. And my name is Jeff Keller. I'm serving as the project manager for the work that's going on out in Edgerton. And the fellow up there is Isaac Crabtree, and Isaac has been doing work for Gardner. And so the two of us are working together on this current effort and here tonight to talk to you about the interim results that we have from this study. The origins of this are pretty simple. As you all know, Edgerton is going to be building a new waste treatment plant to serve the intermodal facility and any development that happens around that area. It is geographically fairly close to some of the areas of Gardner. And with respect to your Kill Creek wastewater treatment plant, it's closer than your current waste treatment plant. And so I know that Jim and Dave had been thinking for some time that it did seem like, by the lay of the land, by gravity, it seemed to be a lot less effort to get some of your wastewater to that location than to take it uphill quite a ways to where you have your current treatment plant. And so through some discussions between the city manager here and the city administrator in Edgerton, we were asked to sit down and have a meeting and talk about a potential very high-level, relatively low-cost study that could be done very quickly to try and identify the magnitude of potential savings that Gardner could realize if they sent some portion of their wastewater to this treatment plant. We only have about a 2-week window to sort of develop those numbers because Edgerton is on a very tight schedule to serve BNSF. They have an obligation to meet their needs, and so construction has to start at a certain time, which means the information that I'm going to present here to you and that Isaac's going to present seems to be pretty clear and pretty compelling. The real challenge, I think, will be that if Gardner is interested in pursuing this, Your challenge will be acting within the window that maximizes your savings. Because, by the beginning of March, we'll be going down a path where it's harder and harder to change the direction of that project and to incorporate changes that would benefit your city. So we're talking about a 2 or 3 week window where not only do the technical issues have to get resolved to everybody's satisfaction, but also the financial issues get resolved to everybody's satisfaction. So the high point here is you've got a map in front of you and you've got a single-page handout in front of you, and we're going to talk about the areas that we're looking at in terms of providing sanitary sewer service, what the city's original concept was to serve it with your own facilities, what the alternative might be if you were to send that flow in a different direction, where the savings comes from, and sort of a general idea right now of the magnitude of that savings. That all being said, we're only halfway through, crunching our numbers. And so I'm not going to give you firm numbers tonight. I just can't. It wouldn't be responsible. I can give you a magnitude of what we're seeing, and it's very positive. So I'm going to step aside and let Isaac, who's much more familiar with your wastewater system, do the talking and explain the details, and then I'll come back and talk about some of the follow-up steps.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm just going to go ahead and focus on this handout, the aerial photo, and just kind of walk you through what we've done so far with the study. And just to kind of take what Jeff has already said tonight and just start there, the project that he's been working on for Edgerton, if you look at the lower left-hand corner of this figure, you'll see a new Edgerton wastewater treatment plant site. That plant, as well as the segment of gravity sewer shown in green directly north of it, that is the Edgerton project that is currently underway right now in design. Having said that, going into the study that we're doing right now for the city of Gardner is looking at the subbasins in the watershed to the southwest of the city. So that would be, if you look at towards the center of this figure, you'll see a note for 191st Street and Waverly Pump Station. That's that blue dot that you see there towards the center of the page. Everything to the north and to the east of that pump station, as you get up into this area that's already developed, that sub-basin area is what we're talking about. And so what we're evaluating is options to convey that flow and treat that flow. So basically our hinge point between two options is at that pump station at 191st and Waverly, which is not in existence right now, but that was the original plan. Gardner's original plan with that pump station was to pump flow to the north, and you'll see I've shown some line work here in, it looks like pink. The color's pink and it's dashed. That's a force main. It's pumped flow, so that's a pressurized pipe that goes to the north. From 191st Street in Waverly, it's about 11,000 feet of pipe that will go to Bull Creek Pump Station, which is an existing pump station. That pump station, under this option, would need to be significantly upgraded. So that is another feature of this plan going north. From there, you would have to have another force main, shown again in pink dashed lines, heading north towards Kill Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant. That line right there would be 9,600 feet long, and it would terminate in a manhole which would convey flow by gravity from that point on to the existing treatment plant at Kill Creek. That gravity force main, or gravity interceptor sewer is 36 inches in diameter and would be approximately a mile long. So in total, that option would have approximately 26,000 feet of pipe. And lastly, the Kill Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant itself would need to be upgraded to receive additional flow. Right now, it's receiving roughly 1.7 million gallons a day, and it's rated for 2.5 million gallons a day. So adding additional flow from this southwest region would result in a need to upgrade that plant. So that's kind of the original plan for Gardner. The option that we're evaluating that option against would be taking flow in the other direction. If you go back to 191st Street in Waverly, that pump station, if you were to go to the west and to the south, there would be, if you're going to send it to Edgerton, there would be a force main that's roughly 8,300 feet long, and that transitions to a gravity interceptor sewer that's already in the process of being designed right now. And so that gravity interceptor sewer is shown in green, and since that's already in the process of being designed, that wouldn't require a new pipe, that would require that pipe to just get a little larger. So that pipe segment is roughly 6,800 feet long, where it terminates at Edgerton Wastewater Treatment Plant. So in total, the length of conveyance for that option would be around 15,000 feet. So you see, from a conveyance standpoint, the Edgerton treatment plant would be a lot closer, on the order of maybe 11,000 feet. In terms of the Edgerton treatment plant itself, that right now is currently being designed for 0.25 MGD capacity, or 250,000 gallons per day. The nice thing about this plant is that it's already set up to be easily expanded for reasons that there's a lot of unknowns with that project. So increasing that capacity to accept additional flow from Gardner would be relatively easy to accomplish and not terribly expensive in terms of treatment cost. At that treatment plant, you wouldn't necessarily have to double all the facilities. It would be just a matter of adding a couple of extra basins and maybe upgrading a couple other facilities. So from a cost standpoint, it's very attractive to upgrade that plant as opposed to upgrading Kill Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant. So that's really where we're at right now with the study. We haven't put all of the dollars together, but I think Jeff's going to come back up and we're going to walk through this other handout that I passed out. Did that cover everything?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. So that's where we're at. That's the high-level picture of what we're looking at. And the handout, this handout that you all have, we only brought 9, so I'm sorry I couldn't maybe get around all the way around the table. We can obviously provide whatever you guys want. Sort of a cheat sheet for everybody to highlight what would need to be built if you kept the collection systems here within Gardner and versus what you would do to get it to Edgerton. And you can see, just listing it out, there's less pipe, there's less facilities in general. And so at the point we're at now, we're pretty clear that you're going to see savings from the collection system, the pipes and the pump station and all that, on the order of well over $1 million, probably well over $2 million in savings, okay? Now, we haven't really tied down cost savings from the treatment plant, because your treatment plant, on larger treatment plants, cities like Gardner, we had tens of thousands of people, you have to expand them in certain increments. You can't just go piecemeal. And so your challenge is you don't always get to expand your facility to the size you really like to expand it to. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and you can't operate it that way. Which you have the opposite situation in Edgerton. It's a small little plant, and so you can increase it incrementally, and that makes it a little easier to deal with when you just need a little extra treatment and not a lot. So not only is it a little less expensive to expand, you can also provide more incremental expansion, and which is kind of important, especially when the upfront capital costs are a major concern. When you don't have a lot of money floating around waiting to be spent, and you can minimize that upfront investment, that can be really helpful. So I have what I'm calling sources of savings here on this sheet, and I'm not going to read them all to you. We've already gone over most of this, but one item, number 5 under Gardner, that I put that is also worth noting is it pushes back your need to expand Kill Creek. If you're not sending all the flow there, it doesn't reach its capacity as quickly, and so you don't need to expand it as soon. The state mandates that once your plant reaches about 80% of its capacity, you have to begin planning for an expansion. Just because your plant is rated for 2.5 million gallons per day doesn't mean you can wait until you're seeing 2.5 million a day coming in to do something about it. You have to start acting when you're getting around 2. I think flows last year were around 2, right? This year's it's a lower year. I don't know, maybe people aren't showering as much or something, but you're not seeing as much water. But generally, you're going to be looking at an expansion very soon. And the question is, can this push that back by some amount? And, by the numbers, it can. So you have that as an additional source of savings. Now, of course, Edgerton benefits from this also. And that's an important question, okay? Where does the savings come from on their side? And it's really from an economy of scale. A rule of thumb when you're talking about a larger treatment plant expansion, somewhere between $8 and $12 a gallon to do a construction project. But as the plant gets smaller, that number starts going up to $15, $20, $25 a gallon. So when you're doing a very small plant, it's extremely expensive. And it's not because you're doing anything really tricky or fancy. It's just to do a little bit of work, you still got to have a lot of guys doing it, and a lot of insurance and a lot of overhead. So as this plant gets, moderately bigger, those unit costs for cubic yard of concrete or foot of pipe or whatever measure you might use, it goes down incrementally. So the end result of the project where Edgerton pays for the treatment plant it needs, and Gardner, in some fashion, pays for the treatment capacity it needs. But everybody saves money because it's a shorter distance and an easier expansion for Gardner. And it's, from an economy of scale standpoint, a more economical project for Edgerton. Now, the details on how those finances might work are outside of our scope as consulting engineers. That's something that the respective city governments would have to work out. And I think technically we're going to have this report worked out this week and have some numbers to put in front of you in terms of final report. From what we're seeing, I think from a dollar standpoint, it's sort of a no-brainer. The real challenge, which I pointed out to you before, is going to be a schedule one, which is if a decision can't be made in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks on whether this is going to move forward or not, then the window of opportunity closes, and it costs too much to change the plan to go back and get a savings. So that's sort of what I want to lay out to everybody today, which is when this comes in, there's going to need to be a pretty rapid decision-making process. And, from my standpoint, I'm okay with whatever the turnout is. I'll do whatever I'm directed to do. But I want you to understand how the situation is right now. And we're here for as long as you need us to be here. If we leave and you've got more questions, I know that Mike can get in contact with us and we can follow up as soon as we can. So, thank you very much for your time.
Any questions?
Yes.
I've got a real quick question. Ties into item number 5 here, the delay of the expansion at Kill Creek. Is it also safe to assume that when that expansion is necessary, it will be a smaller scale? If we can flow some of that water towards the Edgerton station, will it decrease the cost of that expansion when the time comes to it?
Right, I understand, yeah. You're wondering if you're sending some portion of your flow to a different treatment plant, should the expansion be smaller?
Well,
at your existing. What makes sense at Kill Creek is to expand it in a certain increment.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple different sizes, but that's all details. The answer is you'll probably expand it to whatever you were going to expand it to in the first place, but you'll be able to wait a little longer. And so, no, you wouldn't do a smaller expansion at Kill Creek. You'd just maybe be able to wait and push it back a few more years into the future. Because if you did a smaller expansion, it's like trying to put a different size wheel on your car. All 4 wheels need to kind of be in the same size.
Okay. I don't want you guys to go any place just yet, but I do have a question for staff, so. David, I know that Burns and Mac actually came up with a fix for a problem that we had at Kill Creek that was supposed to save us flow, a couple 100,000 gallons a day maybe?
But what it did was more accurately measure, because our metering, we were having issues with the metering for the discharge.
Right.
By correcting this, basically the flows are less than we were anticipating. So therefore, we're operating at a lower level. The need for expansion is farther out because of accurate metering.
Right. And wasn't the previous metering that had us closer to the 80% mark, and now we're further away from it?
That is correct, sir.
What percent are we at?
We're running right at
1.7 out of 2.5. I don't know what that percentage is, but
About 70.
about 65, 70%. Yeah.
right. Yeah, 80% is the threshold for where we need to enter into engineering for.
And how much time does the state give you when you reach 80% to get that plant online?
Basically, their plan is to at 80% you begin design, at 90% they want it in operation. At our current growth rate, it's, not an issue. We've got time. Once the growth rate increases, I think one thing about plant expansion is it depends on where that expansion occurs. If it occurs in this area, then it will force expansion sooner. However, long-term ultimate size, by taking the flow in this basin to Edgerton, the ultimate size of that plant will be less because we're sharing it. An immediate hit, and you guys are in there, Isaac's very familiar with it too, is a substantial part of the basin that flows to the Bull Creek lift station would be diverted to Edgerton. By doing this, we would eliminate, or we would definitely delay, and we would reduce the need to add more pumps, reduce the need to add lift or another force main, reduce the size or need for a detention tank for high flows. So it would really, the short-term impact is the Bull Creek lift station. Long-term, it would reduce the ultimate expansion and need at Kill Creek.
Yeah, that's right. I'd add to that a major portion of the savings that we're seeing right now in terms of the collection system is avoiding that upgrade at the Bull Creek pump station. That's no small job. That is millions of dollars. So if you can avoid or minimize that, that's a huge savings right off the top.
And is there also operating costs, I'm assuming, that are saved by kind of eliminating the need for that Bull Creek station? I'm seeing our people, okay. So you all are kind of talking about the upgrade costs, but there's also just ongoing operating costs that are substantially saved as well.
Definitely, because you would about double the size of that lift station.
Jim?
There definitely would be savings of scale in there because it would about double the size of the Bull Creek lift station, plus adding a 1 million gallon storage tank. It costs about $35,000 a year, give or take, to operate a large lift station. The smaller ones run down to about $20,000 a year. By doubling it, we would add at least another $10,000 a year, if not a little more, to the cost of operating that station.
And probably added manpower also.
Possibly. It's still at one location, so we might be able to still get by with the crew that we have, but it very likely could cause us to go up, one more crew member.
Jim, in the last presentation at the last council meeting, the impression that I left there with is that there's probably going to be the opportunity to eliminate lift stations that are going to be in the area of the 191st and Waverly lift station.
Correct.
How many, was it 3 or 4?
There was one lift station there. There were 2 others that are possible. The Shane's Crossing lift station and one to the southwest of there that isn't even on the books yet, that we may have to build, and we might be able to get rid of them. I can't say for certain whether we can look at the grades and see if that'll work or not.
Is there any chance we can get, the effluent is still going to have to get pumped to here, or do we have gravity on our side from the pump, the lift stations that are down on this corner of the city?
From Shane's Crossing and the Nike lift station that we have now, and possibly the one that I was saying that we might be able to avoid southwest of Shane's Crossing, that would possibly be gravity.
Okay.
From our south lift station, we still got to get up over a hill. It wouldn't be nearly as large a station as what the south lift is now to get over that hill because it wouldn't be very far.
But that's $20,000 to $35,000 worth of savings per
year.
Lift station per year.
Yeah, we might be able to drop the south down to a much smaller lift station, but all of those things we've not looked into specifically as yet.
So I guess my question is and I don't know that this will all be ready at the same time, but I would like to understand just sheer cost savings by by approving the addition, if that's what we decide to do. But then I'd also like to understand futuristically what you see in the plans if we don't do this, and understand costs that we could save as a result of that.
Okay, and they are looking at it only on this one basin right now. Reason being, it depends on how much capacity we might add at the Edgerton station. the ultimate size of that, as they're currently designing it, is about 3 MGD, and we're wanting to add 1 to 1.5 just with this one basin. So by adding that together, there's a point where you don't gain quite as much with the scale. In other words, we would basically overshadow what they're building with what we need.
So they're gonna start with a 250,000 gallon per day plant, and we would actually be creating a 1.5 million gallon?
Ultimately, right now we have zero flow coming out of this basin that would go anywhere. I mean, there's no development at all in that basin. But if it starts, it would start out now at zero and would ultimately build up at full development to about 1.25, maybe 1.5.
Why wouldn't we just build a, 500,000 gallon per day? And, I mean, that would, to me, would seem to be a shared utility investment, whereas us paying for 1.5 million gallons and them only paying for 250,000, seems like we're actually the ones that are, driving the cart.
Well, and we're not saying that we would want to build that 1.5, 1.25, 1.5 now.
So what would we want to build now?
And that's what they're going to determine is what we need now. But
I mean,
the ultimate capacity of their plant would be 3 MGD, and the ultimate amount that we would add to it would be possibly 1.5.
So it would really end up being 4.5, or it would be 3 minus 1.5, so basically 1.5 each?
No, it would be 3 plus 1.5, so it would be 4.5 ultimately, if it works out.
Jim, I think one thing that we could do to maybe illustrate this goes back to Ms. Harrison's question, and that is, could you show us on a piece of paper, not dissimilar to what Burns and Mack has shown us, that here is our plan for sewers for the next 15 years, without any consideration for Edgerton.
Right.
And then here's the plan, if we partner with Edgerton based on how this is kind of sketched out, check off the things, and then we'll have some dollars, hopefully pretty quick, to show this is what we would avoid if we participated in this process.
Absolutely.
So I think then when you show the 10 to 15-year plan, you show for the whole city, not just for this basin, all the things that we're going to do, some of which may not be affected if we participate in this plan, but just show, here's what's been on our, drawing board for the 10 to 15-year future. Here's the things that come out of that if we jointly work on this together.
Yes, I can
Would that
present
be
that.
helpful?
For me, that would be helpful.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Very helpful. I think that's what we could do then.
How much land are we talking about within Gardner's city limits or expected city limits versus what could be on Edgerton's side for development? Percentage, I mean, are we equal there, or?
I don't think it would be an equal amount. The full intermodal facility is about 1,000 to 1,300 acres. We would probably be looking at about a quarter section or 140 to 160 acres, possibly 180 acres at max.
So a fifth, basically.
Roughly, yeah. At full build-out, our Kill Creek plant will be about 7.5 to 8 MGD, and that counts for the whole development of the city at pretty much full build-out. And that would serve somewhere in the vicinity of 75 to 80,000 people. We're at 2.5 MGD now, and that was ultimately thought to serve about 25,000 people. So that's kind of what the scales that we're looking at.
So is the amount of land that's going to be served sort of a linear, can you project, I guess, in a linear fashion on a per gallon basis how much, that land is going to require as far as sewage? I mean, if we're at 20% of 4.5 million, that's 900,000 gallons, right? But you have two different land uses.
Yeah, you would have different land uses. It depends on whether you're looking at residential or commercial industrial.
Well, what are we looking at there?
I think in that basin, we're looking at a mix of commercial industrial, about 50%, and the other half of the part in Gardner. The other half would be about 50% residential,
Versus 100% industrial?
commercial, industrial.
Commercial for
Yes.
Edgerton.
Yeah, and the rates vary from .025 cubic feet per second to, and we've got it in a chart, but and I'm going by memory here, so please don't hold me to all that.
I'll write it down.
Okay.
Sign it at the
Yeah,
end.
but .025 roughly for residential per acre of cubic feet per second, and then you gotta convert that into gallons, versus about .019 for the same acre in a commercial industrial. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you convert CFS to gallons, you multiply by 448, so it gets pretty good sized numbers.
And what about the impact of conservation efforts? I mean, in many cases, it's cheaper to conserve than it is to build.
Certainly on the water side, it would be. On the wastewater side, I don't know that there's as direct a correlation, although certainly it can help.
Is there any way to, I mean, to put conservation practices into place that would slow that rate of need down?
To a degree, we have a water conservation plan, and it talks, helpful hints and things that we publish on that are doing a larger load of wash rather than two smaller ones, loading your dishwasher to the full amount rather than doing partial dishwashing, using the water-saving toilets and the water-saving showers, and we have all those recommendations published out on our website. All those will help, and, you know, watering on off days, that's another part of our conservation conservation plan. There are many aspects that you can do. We actually are lower than many communities already. We average about 110 gallons per capita per individual per day on the water side, and wastewater is thought to be around 90 to 100, but it's much more difficult to pin down. Most other communities are at least 125 to 150 gallons per capita per day, not necessarily in Johnson County, but nationwide. So we are considerably lower already, although it is rising again. At one point when we were in a real water crisis some years ago, everybody got kind of into the habit of doing the conservation and doing it very well, and we were down around 105 gallons per capita per day. It is creeping back up as we have more water available.
So do we have any idea if Edgerton's plant is $10 million, what would Gardner's share of that be? And
I don't know that we do tonight. I think they said they were going to present those kind of figures next week. And certainly you need those figures before you can make any kind of a decision.
Are there any other alternatives that, I mean, a possibility that our development will occur in a different place and therefore we won't need that capacity right next to Edgerton's? I mean, is there, maybe because it would appear as though we put this plant way out where no one wants to develop anymore. And, I mean, so far.
Basically, I think they put it downstream, because that is where the creek goes. It flows south and west and then on into Hillsdale from that point. There is a creek that is crossing I-35 very near our Shanes Crossing lift station, and it would be really wonderful to be able to gravity on down to the creek where this plant would be located, and it does flow almost right by it. Now that's the South Lift Station Basin, the Nike and the Shanes Crossing Lift Station Basin. It's a little tougher to get it from those stations to that creek, but once there, it certainly will go a lot cheaper.
You're saying this particular proposal, or are you saying a different?
No, I'm saying in addition to that, there are several possibilities that we really didn't have time and staff to look at.
But I mean, ultimately, wouldn't it make sense to judge whether that might be a more appropriate location that will yield a broader, a larger radius of expansion around it before we go into something that
Well, there are all sorts of opportunities and things that may come about, but we really don't know. I know Johnson County Wastewater has ultimate plans to build a very large plant down at the county line, almost due south of Spring Hill, and to build a large lift station, pretty much maybe half a mile to a mile east of where this one is looking at, maybe a little farther south, but
Mile and a half east of this one?
yes. And they were, at that time, not anticipating anybody building a plant down there, so this is going to help their plant out as well.
But conversely, they could pay for it and we could lease capacity, right?
Possibly. Theirs is a very long time out from what they're talking about. There will probably be a couple of other plants north of there as interim measures, before they ever get to that large plant down south. That's our problem. We'll be expanding the Bull Creek Lift Station and Kill Creek and probably the South Lift Station well before Johnson County plans to get anywhere near fruition.
And that 12% difference between the 80% threshold and what we're currently at 68% capacity, what do we project is the time frame at which point we'll reach 80% and we'll have had to have started that?
The current projection that we just had, feasibility study from Burns Mac project that, looks at about 2016, 2017 to construct the next expansion.
So that would be 80%?
Yes, we would be reaching 80% at that time and probably 90% by 2016 or 2018, give or take.
So I'm sorry.
So between 80 and 90%, we start designing at 80, and that's probably going to be about 2015.
Oh, 2015. Okay.
For design, but we'll have to have it online by the time we hit 90, which is 2016 or 17.
Okay.
Jim, I'm assuming that the optimal solution with the Edgerton, partnership with Edgerton, is going to be based on our projected growth or what we expect to happen with this vacant unused land. However, there are some existing customers or service areas, I would say, that would benefit from this right away, right? That we would move?
It would open up that whole basin to development, which right now, we'd have to build that 191st and Waverly lift station in order to open it up. So if we had something come in that we might take advantage of as a result of the intermodal, that's the most likely place for that to happen. And we would not be able to do it until we built that fairly large lift station and upgraded the Bull Creek and added the force main and added the tank, all of that in a row.
Okay.
So it could conceivably, with the intermodal going in, where it is and at the time frame it is, I would certainly hope we're going to see some development in that area. And if we don't take part in this, then we're going to be bearing that same cost that we would have had relatively soon.
Okay.
What was the reason, though, that we put the Kill Creek treatment plant where it was? Was that where we projected that the development would be?
At that time, most of the development was expected to be going north, the residential development, and at that time it was. That was before I came on board, but that's what I found in the master plans and the literature that we've had that we have in-house. And certainly there was a good deal of development that did take place to the north, but that has certainly come to a screeching halt now, as everything else has. Whether it will start back up in the north area or not, we don't know, but there's sure a nice set of kindling lit over here to the west. If the intermodal does what it's supposed to do, there's considerable warehousing and other industrial and commercial places that are going to fly off of that, and this is the most likely basin where that will take place.
How long does it take to build a plant?
You can build one in about a year. It's an accelerated schedule. You have to design one also, and normally you take a year to design it and 2 to build it, but you can design it in 6 to 8 months and build it in 12 to 14. That's a very accelerated period to do it, though.
Are package plants an option if there was a need for development?
It's a possibility. I've looked at the cost of package plants and other things, and it's not nearly as cost-effective as building onto your plant.
Right.
It costs you more per MGD than it would at the plant.
And how much, what's the highest capacity you could put in with something like that?
You can stack lift stations, almost indefinitely if you've got the ground. So you could get up to 2.5 MGD with package plants. It's certainly doable. It's not desirable because they're not nearly as durable as what your ultimate plant would be. They normally have a life of maybe 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, a package plant would only be intended to bridge that window of time that you would be developing
Yeah, they're a temporary,
they're a
temporary solution. Yeah.
solution just to keep things going, so. How soon will we have numbers?
Next
Just-
week's
just
what I
next
heard.
week?
Yeah, for you guys to have any reasonable amount of time, we'd have to get the numbers to you next week. We have the conveyance, the pipeline piece pretty well worked out. We're just waiting on pricing from manufacturers, pricing from our construction partner on what that incremental change would be at the treatment plant. And once we get those numbers together, we want to give you something that, will hold fast. And so, we'd like to get a report to the city by the end of this week, for sure. And just to address something that you guys covered a few minutes ago, your comment about, 1.5 MGD expansion onto the Edgerton plant. What we're looking at, directly to your question, is something much more incremental. The first one would be as small as 250,000 gallons per day. It could be closer to 500,000 gallons per day. We might look at both and see which one makes more sense, because that way you could make that incremental expansion early and then wait and see at what rate development happens outside of city limits here and also inside in the basin that would serve. And then you'd know whether you need to gear up in a few years to do another expansion or if you can hold back for a while and have a relatively small plant.
But if Edgerton built a 250,000 gallon plant, why couldn't we ramp up from there? I mean, at a date that we needed it?
At that site, at that wastewater plant? Right, yeah.
Well, I mean, without us having an investment now, what?
Oh, because you're going to have the contractor building it then? Because just as an example, maybe the big treatment basin you need is 80 feet in diameter, but to add on Gardner, you only have to make it 87 feet. Well, if you build the 80-feet tank, and then 2 years later, Gardner says, we could use some treatment capacity, you've already built the tank. Then you have to build a separate tank, and that is dramatically more expensive than just making things slightly bigger. That economy of scale pretty much goes away, and that's where a lot of that savings comes from.
It's the tank mostly.
It's the tank, yeah. I mean, really the only new things that we would need to build in that first phase beyond the piping, would be an additional tank, and some of the equipment that the city would already have bought would need to be the next size up. And so, if you're buying a washing machine and it's 3 cubic feet, it's not that much more to buy the 4 cubic foot washing machine. It's a lot more to buy 2 3 cubic feet washing machine. And these pieces of treatment equipment don't get much smaller.
I'm with you.
Yeah, and I just bought a washing machine, so I really have a feel for that right now. But that's the kind of mentality we're going through now. It's a fairly small investment, dramatically smaller than a new plant, to just buy a little bit bigger machine and put it in the same building you were going to build anyway.
Well, what are those increments then? I mean, are they coming 250,000 gallon per day?
Yeah, once you get below that 250,000 gallon threshold, you just got to buy the smallest size they've got and deal with the fact that you're spending a premium. But usually you don't build a wastewater treatment plant unless you've got more than a couple 100,000 gallons of flow coming your way. Otherwise, that, package plant option becomes a lot more attractive. They're built for those scenarios when you only have 50,000 gallons or 75,000 gallons, something like that.
Not to oversimplify it, but from an engineering alone perspective, has the firm seen any reason why this wouldn't be a great solution for Gardner to enter into with Edgerton? Is it looking at everything and said, this is the right way for it to go?
You make me answer that, huh?
I'm going to ask you. Yeah, I can't make you do anything, but I certainly ask that you do.
Well, what I said is, we've looked at the pipeline piece today. We've pretty got that mapped out pretty thoroughly. There is no doubt. There is no doubt at all. I mean, it's not that, well, maybe maybe it's a few dollars here and there. It's well over $1 million, maybe beyond $2 million in the piping piece. But now the treatment plant piece could take away from some of that. You know, maybe you lose some savings out of there. My gut tells me that you're going to save money on the treatment plant side also, but I'm not prepared to say that for sure. We're looking at that right now. Until we get that pricing in place, I can't say that.
Why wouldn't we save money on the treatment side?
I have no idea.
Oh.
I expect that you would, but, you know, until I've seen the numbers come back from the equipment vendors, until I've talked to our engineering partner, I'm not comfortable saying that. It's just my expectation.
And what would be the next increase in capacity for our current Kill Creek plant?
The best we can do is about half of one treatment train, and that's 1.125 MGD. A full treatment train is 2.5. And that was the expected expansion that we had originally planned to do. Due to finances, we've been looking real strongly at trying to make that half. We lose some economy of scale by doing that and some other things, but we only spend this much now. And the full treatment train was estimated by our last master plan at about $16 million. We have had half a treatment train estimated by the same firm, and they're looking at about $10 million just for half a treatment train. So the expense for doing the whole 2.5 goes up by doing it that way, but we don't expend, you know, nearly as much all right today as we would otherwise.
When you say 2.5, though, I thought the maximum was 1 and was half of that 2.5.
No, we can't split it any lower than that. You know, 2.5 is a full train. We can split that in half because there are 2 tanks.
So we can double this capacity, right?
We could double the capacity of the plant.
And that's it, you can't go anymore.
No, we can go up to a full 7.5 MGD. Right now, we're at 2.5.
Yeah.
A full expansion now would get us to 5, and then the third expansion that was projected originally would get us to 7.5. Right now, instead of looking at the 2.5 for 16 million, we'd rather look at 1.25 for 10 million.
So when we get these numbers next week, we'll also have a comparison as to what it would cost to do 1 1/8.
Yes.
Uh,
Well, I say that, I better
you'll give
ask
us-
Jeff first.
Yes, well, it'll be a comparison. It won't be just a number standing alone. It'll be in comparison to what your lowest price option could be, staying within your own treatment system.
But will it be scaled to the larger capacity of the 1 1/8? In other words,
You know-
in other words, it wouldn't be fair to compare 500,000 gallons
No,
to a
it's
1
not.
1/8.
What we're struggling with is how do you fairly represent that? Because if you can't build your plant expansion any smaller, then you're stuck with that price. However, you're right, it's not fair. It's still a little bit of apples and oranges. So one of the things we're contemplating doing is showing, here's the price for the first phase, that 250,000 gallon per day increment. And then the next phase would be another size up. You know, and at the end of the day, you can build out to that 1.25 that you would do here at Kill Creek, and you can compare those 2 prices. That might be a wash. They might be about the same price. The difference would be you don't have to spend all that now. You can spend that smaller increment, but less money when you don't know if you need that 1.25.
Okay.
And so that might be another thing we point out, that you save a lot on the piping system. Maybe you don't save as much on the treatment plant, but in the end, it's still a better choice because of X, Y, and Z. Now, if something completely unforeseen happens, and it doesn't make financial sense, you'll see that too. I mean, we have no vested interest one way or the other. We just want to give you the numbers so you can make a decision. But it is something that we're struggling with, Councilman. You can't build any smaller at Kill Creek, and you can build smaller at Edgerton, and so how do you fairly compare those? And we'll have to leave that up to your guys' discretion.
And do you also do the package plants as well? Is that something you would do?
We do for industrial clients and some of our clients, we do that. And they are,
But not necessarily us, or?
oh no, it's just not common for municipalities to do package plants because they're not as durable. You end up having to replace them or do a plant expansion soon thereafter, and in the big picture, it ends up being a loss. Because they're, for what you get, they're very expensive. But there's a market for them because people need them.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Sure.
Look
Thank you
forward to
very
the
much.
numbers.
Thanks, Jim.
My apologies for being late. Work went long today. So, all right, now we're back to the original item, number 2, which was procurement of engineering services. David, you presenting?
Appreciate the opportunity to discuss this issue with you. I know it's come up several times, and you all have asked for a discussion on how we procure engineering services. It's been kind of a group effort between Tim McEldowney and then David Comstock, who retired from KDOT after 39 years. And most recent, his last position was Director of Engineering and Design. Dave, since he's retired, works with the American Council of Engineering Consultants and Companies as a quality-based selections representative. But Dave's also here to assist in the presentation. As I said, actually had the pleasure of first meeting Dave almost 30 years ago when he was the program engineer with what was then I think it was Secondary Roads Department with KDOT. So we've known each other many years. There are generally 3 ways to secure engineering services or any professional services. There's a low price method. There's a combination of qualifications and a price. And then finally, there's what's called qualifications-based selection. Brief history of how the city has dealt with it. When I first arrived, we followed more or less a qualifications-based selection process. Requested proposals, reviewed them, selected, usually we always have basically a team a committee to review those, rate them, and then would negotiate a price and present it to council. In those days, interviews weren't always the norm. Beginning about 2003, we started using a process that Johnson County followed, which was a hybrid, which is the qualifications plus price. How that works is you review proposals based on qualifications, then you interview, and the shortlisted firms will submit a sealed envelope after the committee has completed reviews. Then you factor in the price based on a prorated scale, usually a fairly small amount of the points. And then finally, the straight qualifications basis you select based on qualifications. The problem is, as Dave will be able to address much better than I, where you run into issues is in the issue of scope. How do you price this type of service? If you're going to go and you're going to base it on a price, then the staff has to present a very detailed scope of services. Generally, what we do is we provide an end product. We need you to design this roadway. How you get there is based on your expertise. But that's kind of a history of where we are. And then after about 2007, when we started getting into more complex projects, specifically the Stormwater Master Plan, the Transportation Master Plan, and we've encountered in several of our design projects that were loosely scoped and depended upon a collaboration with the consultant, we've gone back and are recommending use of a qualifications-based selection process. I think with that, I think I will turn it over to David to talk about the process, and then after that, David, Tim, and I would be available for discussion and questions.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council persons.
I can't hope to be as exciting as the presentation just before me. I remember Dr. Gregoropoulos in college in water and wastewater. It was fascinating. What I'd like to do is just briefly go through some of the pros and cons of qualification of procurement methods. I have some interest in qualification-based selection itself. I did that for at least 16 years at KDOT, selected consultants that way for the Comprehensive Highway Program in 1989, and then again for the Comprehensive Transportation Program in 1997. So we selected literally hundreds of consultants using that method. We were required to do that by state law. You're not, unless you involve federal funds or state funds. But I would rather present to you why I think it's in your best interest to get a better product by procuring by qualification based. Let me run through those pros and cons real quickly, and then what I want to do is stop and see what questions you've got, what kind of discussion you want to go through. Some of the pros of low bid, it's a pretty fast selection method. All you got to do is ask for bids. Takes very little time and effort, so you can be sort of, if you will, sort of lazy, and get that information pretty quickly. It can sometimes turn out to be that apparently the cheapest initial cost might not be in the life cycle cost. And it's pretty easy to explain to the public. I know your difficulty when your constituent says, "What do you mean you didn't take low bid?" That can be a question that you have to be ready to answer. Some of the disbenefits of low bid, as I mentioned, it doesn't account for the total life cycle cost. I don't know about quality. If there's a low bid, somebody's got to be able to meet that somehow and still have profit. It's known that some design firms won't participate because they can't tell for sure what they're going to have to spend to do it. And therefore it could result in more change orders and more argument, if you will, in the course of the project. You've got apples and oranges. The same scope is not being looked at by competing firms. And in order to try to get that low bid, they will be tempted to cut the scope of work so that they can fit some number that would wind up in them getting the job. The sealed envelope that David mentioned, or a second method in which people have tried to meld the two, is to the sealed envelope. Is still not necessarily based on the same scope of work because you haven't sat down and interviewed and negotiated your way through a more detailed scope. And of course, once money gets involved, then it tends to become the component, despite your 10% formulas and some things like that. It still is a powerful motivator, obviously, for governments. Qualification-based selection is perhaps a little more difficult to explain to the public. As we mentioned previously, in some other methods, there may be less cost now, but the life cycle savings may be there with qualification. It encourages ideas and innovation and creativity, and I was listening to this, some of the creativity that's came before you in the previous presentation in your cooperation with Edgerton, and some of that is I think an example of a qualification-based approach to a project. You drill out some of those neat ideas. Should be a higher quality project. You should get realistic bids because there aren't hidden unknown conditions. More of those are ferreted out. As we mentioned, you get all that innovation and creativity. We almost always shortlisted down to 3 consultants, interviewed them at KDOT, and we got lots of ideas from one that the other one didn't have. And so we kind of were able to, develop fill out that scope as we went along. Design, of course, any engineer will tell you is a very low proportion of the total life cycle cost, and you ought to spend a little money up front to make sure that you get it right. But on the other hand, that's a check you have to write today, so it's current money.